While nobles feasted on roasted swans, medieval peasants had something even better: a thriving fast food empire that could feed you for less than a single copper coin. But here's what historians don't want you to know. These medieval restaurants used a business model so brilliant that McDonald's basically copied it 800 years later. Medieval peasants had their own version of fast food, and it started with something that would blow your mind today. They ate their plates. Yes, you heard that right. The actual plate went down the hatch along with dinner. These edible plates were called trenchers, basically thick slabs of stale bread carved into bowl shapes. Think of them as the medieval equivalent of those fancy bread bowls you get at chain restaurants, except these weren't a gimmick, they were pure necessity. The bread was typically day-old or older, hard enough to hold liquids without falling apart in your hands like a soggy napkin. But here's where it gets clever. That stale bread wasn't just sitting there being useless. As you ladled your soup, stew, or whatever slop was on the menu, the trencher slowly absorbed all those flavors. By the end of your meal, you had a perfectly seasoned, sauce-soaked piece of bread ready to eat. It was like having dessert built right into your dinner plate. The genius of the system becomes clear when you realize medieval peasants didn't exactly have a team of dishwashers standing by. No running water, no soap that didn't cost a fortune, and definitely no time to scrub dishes when you're working from sunrise to sunset just to survive. Trenchers solved the cleanup problem completely. Eat your meal, eat your plate, done. Street vendors in bustling cities like London caught onto this brilliant hack immediately. They could serve hot meals without worrying about customers walking off with their bowls or having piles of dirty dishes to deal with. The trencher system was basically the medieval equivalent of disposable packaging, except nothing got thrown away. Well, almost nothing. Sometimes peasants would toss their trenchers to dogs or give them to beggars after the meal, but most of the time, down the hatch it went. These bread bowls provided extra calories that working folks desperately needed, and wasting food was about as smart as burning money. The whole setup was like getting a 2-course meal in one. Your main dish came with a built-in side of flavored bread. No wonder trenchers became the go-to choice for anyone who needed to eat quickly and move on with their day. Of course, bread wasn't the only thing medieval peasants were drinking to survive their grueling daily routines. What they were sipping might surprise you even more than edible dinnerware. While most of us reach for coffee to start our day, medieval peasants grabbed something with a bit more kick: small beer. And before you start picturing drunk farmers stumbling through wheat fields, let me stop you right there. This wasn't your uncle's weekend beer bender. Small beer was basically the Gatorade of the Middle Ages, except it actually tasted decent. With an alcohol content hovering around 2 to 3%, it packed just enough punch to kill nasty bacteria lurking in questionable water sources. Think of it as medieval water purification, but way more fun. Here's where it gets interesting. Everyone drank this stuff. Kids, pregnant women, monks. The whole medieval gang was sipping small beer from sunrise to sunset. A typical peasant knocked back 3 to 4 pints daily, which sounds excessive until you realize their water could literally kill them. Well, priorities, right? The brewing process was surprisingly quick. Unlike today's craft beer that takes weeks to perfect, small beer was ready in just 3 to 5 days. Medieval housewives became expert brewers out of pure necessity, turning grains into liquid survival faster than you could say Budweiser. But here's the genius part. Small beer wasn't just hydration. It was liquid calories walking around in a cup. When you're burning thousands of calories working fields by hand, every sip counted toward keeping body and soul together. Those grains packed a serious nutritional punch, delivering energy that kept peasants powered through back-breaking labor. The economics made perfect sense, too. Grain that might spoil could be transformed into something that lasted longer and provided more bang for the buck. Medieval recycling at its finest, waste not, want not, gets slightly buzzed in the process. Different regions developed their own signature brews. Northern areas favored oat-based versions, while southern regions went heavy on barley. Each household had secret recipes passed down through generations, creating a medieval craft beer scene that would make modern hipsters weep with envy. The social aspect can't be ignored either. Sharing small beer built community bonds stronger than any modern team-building exercise. When everyone's slightly relaxed from their daily dose of fermented grain goodness, conversations flow easier and disputes settle quicker. Then there's the obvious benefit. It was available everywhere, anytime. No fancy packaging, no refrigeration needed, no expiration dates to stress about. Just grab your leather flask and you're good to go. Speaking of grab-and-go medieval style, peasants needed more than just liquid sustenance to keep their energy up throughout those grueling workdays. Medieval pies weren't just food, they were portable lunch boxes with attitude. These handheld marvels solve the same problem we face today when we're rushing between meetings, except instead of grabbing a burrito from a food truck, peasants grabbed a meat pie from the local baker. But here's where it gets interesting. These weren't your grandmother's delicate pastries with flaky crusts that crumble at the slightest touch. Medieval pies came wrapped in what bakers called coffin crusts, thick, sturdy pastry shells that could survive a bumpy cart ride and still keep your lunch intact. Think of them as medieval Tupperware, except you could eat the container when you were done. The filling? Well, that's where creativity met desperation. Bakers stuffed these portable meals with whatever protein was available and affordable. Sometimes it was beef or pork if you were lucky. Other times it might be pigeon, rabbit, or even smaller birds that probably had names you couldn't pronounce. One Baker's Guild record from 14th century London shows that humble pie, made from deer organs, was actually more popular than regular meat pies among working folk. Why? Simple economics, my friend. Organ meat was cheaper, but it was still protein-packed and filling enough to fuel a day of hard labor. The genius wasn't just in the ingredients, though. These pies were designed for one-handed eating. The thick crust created a natural handle, keeping your actual food clean from dirty work hands. Miners heading down into the shafts could grip their lunch without worrying about contamination, something that would make today's health inspectors weep with joy. Regional variations popped up faster than franchise locations. Yorkshire had their version, Cornwall perfected theirs, and London bakers competed fiercely for the best recipe. Each area adapted fillings based on local ingredients and preferences, creating the medieval equivalent of regional fast food chains. The really clever part? These pies stayed warm for hours after baking. Wrap one in cloth, tuck it into your work pouch, and you had a hot meal waiting whenever hunger struck. No reheating required, just unwrap and devour. Bakers' records show that meat pies outsold bread loaves 3-to-1 during market days. That's medieval market research right there, proving that even 600 years ago, people preferred grab-and-go convenience over sit-down dining. But while pies dominated the handheld meal market, peasants had another trick up their sleeves for quick-filling food that required even less preparation time. Medieval peasants had their own version of the pancake breakfast special, and trust me, it was way more practical than anything IHOP ever dreamed up. Oatcakes were the ultimate quick meal, faster than your morning coffee routine and twice as filling. These weren't your fluffy Sunday morning pancakes, mind you. Oatcakes were dense, portable, and cooked on simple griddles over open flames. The beauty? Anyone with a flat piece of metal and some oats could whip up breakfast, lunch, or dinner in minutes. No fancy ovens required. But here's where medieval fast food gets clever. Flatbreads served double duty as both meal and plate. Why dirty dishes when you can eat them? Peasants would slap whatever they had onto these edible platforms. Leftover meat, cheese, or even just a smear of lard if times were tough. The cooking method was pure genius for its time. Open, fires functioned like medieval food trucks, except the truck was wherever you happened to be. Harvest workers carried their griddle pans to the fields. Shepherds cooked flatbreads on hillsides. Market vendors set up shop with nothing more than a fire and a flat cooking surface. Then there's the ingredient list. Beautifully simple. Oats, a bit of water, maybe some salt if you were feeling fancy. Compare that to today's pancake mix with its 17 unpronounceable chemicals. Medieval folks were doing clean eating before it was trendy. Oatcakes became the star of harvest festivals, which makes perfect sense when you think about it. Quick to make, easy to share, and you could feed dozens of people without breaking a sweat. Plus, they stayed warm long enough for everyone to grab one while dancing around like medieval party animals. Well, the real stroke of brilliance was the communal aspect. Flatbreads were meant for sharing. Tear off a piece, pass it around, load it up with whatever the group had gathered. It was social media before social media, bringing people together over food. Regional variations popped up everywhere, just like how different states argue over barbecue styles today. Scottish oatcakes were thicker. Welsh versions had different grain mixtures. Each area put its own spin on the basic concept. The The portability factor was unmatched. Wrap a few flatbreads in cloth, and you had trail mix that actually filled you up. No wonder travelers and workers preferred them over anything requiring utensils or lengthy preparation. Speaking of portable medieval meals, there was one food that took convenience to an entirely different level, designed specifically for people who couldn't stop working long enough to eat properly. Here's something that would make any modern food scientist weep with joy. The Cornish pasty wasn't just food, it was engineering genius wrapped in pastry. These hefty D-shaped parcels solve problems that today's meal prep enthusiasts are still figuring out. The thick, crimped crust wasn't decoration. It served as a built-in handle, letting tin miners grab their lunch with filthy hands without contaminating the actual food inside. Brilliant, right? The crust was so robust it could survive being dropped down a mine shaft. Try that with your sandwich. Pasties stayed piping hot for hours, thanks to their dense pastry armor. Miners would tuck them inside their shirts at dawn, and by noon, they'd still have a warm meal waiting. No microwave needed. The filling, usually beef, potato, swede, and onion, created its own little steam chamber. Pure medieval food science. But here's where it gets clever. Different families had signature crimping patterns along the crust edge, like edible fingerprints. Miners could identify their lunch in a crowd faster than you can spot your phone case. Some bakers even stamped initials into the pastry. Personal branding, 1300 style. The real genius? Nothing went to waste. Leftover vegetables, scraps of meat, even yesterday's potatoes found new life inside pasty walls. Medieval meal prep that would make today's zero-waste movement proud. Each pasty was essentially a mystery box of whatever needed eating. Travel rations don't get better than this. Shepherds carried them across moors. Farmers packed them for harvest days. The thick crust protected contents from rain, dirt, and the general chaos of medieval life. Your energy bar wishes it was this tough. Regional variations popped up everywhere. Devon added cream. Some areas threw in apples for sweetness. Others went savory with herbs. The basic concept remained bulletproof, but local tastes shaped the filling. Medieval customization at its finest. The best part? You could eat them one-handed while working. The handle crust meant farmers could munch while tending sheep, or workers could grab quick bites during short breaks. Fast food that actually made sense for fast lives. Some miners even saved part of their crust for the knockers, underground spirits they believed protected them. Supernatural tip jar paid in pastry. Makes you wonder what kind of offerings our modern food delivery apps deserve. These weren't just convenient, they were survival tools disguised as lunch. But speaking of survival, there's another medieval comfort food that kept people going through harsh winters. Nothing announced your medieval street vendor quite like the sweet, smoky scent of roasted chestnuts wafting through the air. These weren't just snacks. They were portable heaters that happened to taste incredible. Street hawkers positioned themselves like tactical food operatives. Markets, church steps, busy crossroads, anywhere cold, hungry people gathered. Smart positioning, really. It's like today's food trucks parking outside office buildings at lunchtime, except these vendors carried their entire operation in a simple brazier. The genius lay in the chestnuts themselves, cheap, abundant, and naturally packaged in their own shells. No fancy containers needed. Just pop them over hot coals, wait for that telltale crack, and you've got medieval fast food that doubles as a hand warmer. Your grandmother probably remembers this same trick from her childhood winters. But here's what made chestnut vendors the unsung heroes of medieval street food. They created theater. The sizzling sounds, that irresistible aroma drifting down cobblestone streets, the vendors' practiced flip of chestnuts over glowing coals. Pure sensory marketing before anyone knew what marketing was. The economics were brilliant too. One vendor could serve dozens of customers with minimal investment. A small cart, some charcoal, and a sack of chestnuts could generate steady income all winter long. Talk about a low-overhead business model that would make modern entrepreneurs jealous. Well, the social aspect mattered just as much. Buying roasted chestnuts wasn't a quick grab-and-go transaction. People lingered around the warm brazier, chatting with neighbors, catching up on local gossip. These vendors accidentally created medieval social media hubs, and the timing, perfect. Chestnuts ripen in autumn just when temperatures drop and people crave something warm and filling. Nature's own seasonal marketing campaign. The nuts stayed fresh for months when stored properly, giving vendors a reliable product through the coldest season. The beauty was in the simplicity. No complex recipes, no expensive ingredients, no special equipment beyond a brazier and some skill with fire. Yet somehow, this humble setup produced one of medieval Europe's most beloved street foods. The thick shells acted like medieval packaging, keeping the meat clean and sterile until consumption. Crack open your natural wrapper, enjoy the steamy, sweet interior, then toss the biodegradable shell. Environmental consciousness centuries before anyone coined the term. These weren't just random snacks either. Chestnuts packed serious nutritional value. Carbohydrates, protein, vitamins. For working peasants, they provided genuine sustenance wrapped in affordable comfort food. But if you think chestnuts were the ultimate peasant comfort food, wait until you discover what medieval cooks could accomplish with nothing more than a handful of grain and some creativity. Morning arrived with rumbling stomachs and empty coin purses. What could a peasant grab that was faster than waiting for the baker and cheaper than yesterday's leftover trencher? Enter gruel and porridge, medieval England's answer to instant breakfast. Well, sort of instant. These weren't your fancy rolled oats from the health food aisle. We're talking about whatever grain survived the winter, mixed with water and heated until it resembled something edible. Barley, oats, rye, basically anything that hadn't rotted in storage became breakfast. The beauty wasn't in the taste, trust me. But here's where it gets interesting. Gruel was essentially medieval meal replacement powder. One bowl packed enough calories to fuel a day of backbreaking farm work. Modern energy bars wish they could deliver that kind of sustained power. Plus, unlike bread that went stale faster than a teenager's attention span, gruel stayed warm for hours in the pot. The preparation was brilliantly simple. Toss grains in a cauldron, add water, stir occasionally while doing other chores. No complex recipes, no special equipment, no guild membership required. Even the poorest peasant family could manage this culinary masterpiece. Makes sense, right? Regional variations kept things from getting too monotonous. Northern villages might add whatever vegetables survived winter storage, turnips, cabbage, maybe some dried herbs if they were feeling fancy. Southern areas sometimes sweetened their morning gruel with honey or preserved fruits. The Welsh threw in leeks because, well, they put leeks in everything. Winter mornings transformed this humble mixture into liquid comfort. Steam rising from wooden bowls provided warmth for cold hands, while the thick consistency filled bellies that might not see another full meal until evening. No medieval peasant complained about their gruel being too hot. Cold mornings made scalding porridge feel like luxury, but the real genius lay in its flexibility. Sweet gruel worked for breakfast. Savory versions doubled as dinner. Thin it out for soup. Thicken it for a hearty meal that stuck to your ribs. Add whatever protein you could afford, a bit of bacon fat, some cheese rinds, maybe an egg if the chickens were cooperating. The cooking process itself became communal. Large pots meant sharing with neighbors, creating informal breakfast gatherings that strengthened village bonds. Gossip flowed as freely as the gruel, making morning meals social events rather than solitary affairs. Speaking of social dining, nothing brought medieval communities together quite like the evening meal. And when peasants really wanted to stretch their ingredients into something spectacular, they turned to a cooking method that transformed scraps into feasts. Pottage was basically the medieval equivalent of throwing everything into a slow cooker and hoping for the best. Except instead of coming home to dinner after work, peasants would start their stockpot at dawn and let it bubble away all day while they tended fields or fixed roofs. The beauty of pottage? You could toss in whatever scraps you had lying around. Got some wilted cabbage? Chuck it in. Half-rotten turnips? Perfect. A bone with maybe 3 specks of meat still clinging to it? That's basically liquid gold right there. It was like playing ingredient roulette, but somehow it always worked out. Well, mostly, medieval cookbooks, yes, they existed, though most peasants couldn't read them anyway, described pottage as a mess of pottage. And mess was absolutely the right word. This wasn't Instagram-worthy food. This was survival cuisine that happened to taste pretty decent when you were hungry enough. The cooking process took forever, which was actually brilliant. Unlike modern fast food that demands immediate attention, pottage was the ultimate set-it-and-forget-it meal. Peasants could stir it occasionally between chores, adding water when it got too thick, tossing in herbs if they felt fancy. But here's where it gets interesting. Pottage wasn't just about feeding your family. It was about feeding your entire extended clan, plus whoever happened to drop by. Medieval hospitality meant your pot had to stretch, and pottage was infinitely expandable. More guests, more water. Simple math that even worked when you were too tired to think straight. The seasonal variations were remarkable. Spring pottage might include fresh greens and early vegetables. Summer versions got loaded with whatever the garden produced. Come winter, you were basically making soup from stored root vegetables and hoping your preserved meat hadn't gone completely off. And the weird part is how nutritious this actually was. Modern nutritionists would probably approve of this slow-cooked, vegetable-heavy, bone broth-based meal. Medieval peasants accidentally created something healthier than half the processed food we eat today. Different regions had their signature styles too. Northern areas favored barley-thick versions that could practically stand up by themselves. Southern regions went lighter, more broth-like. Each family had their secret ingredient, usually whatever grew wild nearby that didn't kill you when eaten. The communal aspect made pottage more than just food. Sharing from the same pot created bonds. Arguments got settled over steaming bowls. Marriages were arranged while stirring the day's batch. Makes you wonder if we lost something important when we started eating alone, staring at screens instead of gathering around a bubbling pot that represented survival, community, and hope all mixed together.